In the last part of this practical, the GSR, we'll be monitoring the function of the autonomic nervous system. To do this, we'll place electrodes on the participants' fingers and monitoring sweat gland activity. So the production of sweat is under the control of the autonomic nervous system, and when sweat production changes, so does the resistance of the skin. So again, this can be detected by electrodes and form a trace. So today we'll be asking the participant to respond to multiple different types of sensory cues and seeing how that affects the function of their autonomic nervous system. So for this last section of the practical, the galvanic skin response, or GSR, we're going to be measuring the function of the autonomic nervous system. And to do this, we're going to measure the production of sweat in the fingertips. So we'll need to use these electrodes which are placed on the fingertips. Okay, so Catrin, if you could just rest your arm with your palm facing up on the bench like that, and try not to move because that can cause interference on the trace. Okay. So this red line on the trace is showing us the autonomic nervous system function, or a readout of it, and you'll notice that even now Catrin isn't responding to any stimuli that I'm presenting, but it's still fluctuating, and that's because the autonomic nervous system is always active. And so I want to make sure that this red line is fairly stable before I present a stimuli, but it doesn't need to be completely flat. And then when I can see that the subject is relaxed, I'm going to stroke Catrin's arm and see what response we get. So as I said in the introduction, the autonomic nervous system will be activated by things such as touch, and so you can see on the trace that we're getting peaks every time that I stroked Catrin's arm. But one interesting thing is that these peaks actually reduce in size each time I repeat that stimulus. And so one thing you'll have to think about is why these peaks are reducing in size each time. Okay, so this time I'm going to see if I can activate Catrin's fight or flight response by producing a loud sound and see what effect that has on the trace. So Catrin, if you could close your eyes. So as we can see on this trace, we've got a large peak when I clapped near Catrin's ear, and that is her autonomic nervous system being activated, the fight or flight mode, when she heard that loud, unexpected noise. Okay, so now we're going to be seeing Catrin's response to a range of different smells. So here I've got 6 smells, and I'm going to see what Catrin's response are to each of these. Okay, so now in this trace we can see different peaks in response to the different smells. So for example, this first peak here is in response to smell A, and we can see that we've got different sizes of peaks in response to different smells. If we take smell A, for example, this peak here, smell A is actually nothing. But we do often see a peak in response to smell A because of the sort of nervous anticipation of what's to come, and actually it produces a response even though there's no sensory stimuli there. Equally, this last peak for smell F is large because smell F is not very nice, very pungent, horrible smell. So it produces a very strong response. So now I'm going to present Catrin different images and again record what response she has using this software. So on this trace we can see the response that Catrin's had to these different images. So for example, this first peak here was in response to a skyline, and you can see that Catrin's had quite a large response to that because she used to live there, and that's a really great example because it's obviously evoked a memory and then caused a really big emotional response, and we can see that on the trace. So that's a great example. We can also see that there was then barely any response when Catrin saw a picture of a sandwich, suggesting that she's not having a particularly emotional reaction to that and possibly just isn't hungry. So those are good examples of how an emotive picture can cause a reaction, and then a picture that you don't have a memory or an emotion linked to doesn't really cause much of a reaction.